You really think you're the one who made this trip happen, Emily? Linda and I have been going over everything, and it's time to stop letting you rewrite history. Those messages you left on the family chat? We all saw how you tried to make yourself look like the savior. This holiday weekend is going to be different. Everyone is going to hear the real story about what you've actually done for this family. Don't act so innocent. The text thread doesn't lie, and neither do I.
Hi, my name is Emily Harper. I'm 30 years old. I stood in the middle of the living room at the coastal cottage we had rented for 2 weeks in North Carolina, my hands still holding the grocery bag I had just carried in from the car. My mother, Carol Harper, had delivered those 5 lines without raising her voice, yet every word landed like a deliberate cut. I had not left any complaining messages on any family chat. I had not tried to make myself look like a savior. I had simply spent the last month quietly finding this cottage, negotiating the rate, coordinating arrival times around everyone's work schedules, and making sure the fridge would have basics when we all got here. The silence that followed felt heavier than the humid coastal air pressing against the windows. My father, Robert Harper, shifted in his chair by the window but said nothing. My sister Megan Ellis and her husband David Ellis stood near the kitchen island exchanging a quick glance I could not quite read. Linda Thompson, the family friend who had joined us for the first few days, kept her eyes on the floor. No one corrected my mother. No one asked what text thread she was talking about. I set the grocery bag on the counter and walked out onto the back deck without another word. The wooden boards creaked under my feet. Out on the water, a small sailboat moved slowly across the sound. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the family group chat. There were no recent messages from me at all, only the usual logistics about who was bringing what and when people would arrive. My mother's accusation made no sense, unless she was working from something else entirely. That night, I could not sleep. The cottage had 4 bedrooms upstairs and a pull-out sofa in the den. I had taken the smallest room at the end of the hall, so everyone else could have more space. Around 2 in the morning, I got up to get a glass of water. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. On the kitchen table, someone had left the shared tablet we sometimes used for recipes and maps. The screen was still awake. A messaging app was open. I did not mean to read it. The thread was between my mother and Linda Thompson. The most recent messages had been sent 2 days before we left for the trip. Carol. She always does this, makes herself the center of everything. This time, we are going to make sure everyone sees it clearly. Linda. At the big dinner on Saturday? Carol. Yes. I will bring up the cottage booking first, then the way she acted last Christmas. We have enough stories now. Rebecca already believes most of them. Helen, too. Linda. What if she tries to defend herself? Carol. She will not. She never does. She just gets quiet and leaves the room. That is what we count on. I scrolled back further. There were older messages stretching back weeks, sometimes months. Stories about how I had barely helped with a family reunion 2 years earlier. Claims that I had taken credit for a group gift I had actually organized and paid for. A long thread about how I was difficult to include because I asked too many questions about plans. None of it matched what had actually happened. I had the receipts, the emails, the old photograph with my father's handwriting on the back from that same reunion weekend. He had written, "Emily did the hard part again. Thank you, kid." I had kept the photo in my wallet for years without showing anyone. My hands felt cold against the tablet screen. I set it back exactly where I had found it and went upstairs. In my small room, I pulled the photograph from my wallet and looked at it under the bedside lamp. The note was still there, faded but legible. My father had been gone 3 years, but his words were proof of something my mother was now trying to erase. The next morning, I made coffee and sat on the deck again. My mother came out with her own mug and sat 2 chairs away without speaking. I waited. She waited. The only sound was the water against the pilings below the deck. "Mom," I said finally, keeping my voice even. "What text thread were you talking about yesterday?" She took a slow sip. "You know exactly which one." "I really do not." She set her mug down. Linda showed me the screenshots you sent to your friends last month. The ones where you said this family was exhausting and you were tired of being the only one who ever does anything. I had never sent any such messages. I had vented to one close friend in a private text about how planning the trip had been stressful, but I had not used those words, and I had not sent screenshots to anyone. The accusation was so specific and so false that for a moment I wondered if I was losing track of my own memory. I did not send anything like that, I said. My mother gave a small, cold smile. Of course you did not. You never do anything wrong, do you, Emily? She stood and went back inside. The screen door clicked shut behind her. I stayed on the deck until the coffee went cold in my hands. 2 seagulls fought over a piece of bread someone had thrown from a neighboring cottage. I watched them until one flew away with the prize. That afternoon, I drove into the small town nearby to pick up more groceries and to clear my head. The local market was run by a man named Frank Miller, who remembered us from the year before. He asked how the family was enjoying the cottage. I told him it was beautiful. He nodded and said his wife, Clara Jenkins, owned several of the rentals along the Sound and always tried to make sure families had what they needed. I thanked him and left. When I returned to the cottage, Linda Thompson was on the deck with my mother. They stopped talking when I walked up the steps. Linda gave me a quick, nervous smile that did not reach her eyes. My mother did not smile at all. Over the next 3 days, the tension settled into the house like humidity. My sister Megan tried to keep things light at dinner, asking about work and weekend plans. My brother-in-law David mostly stayed quiet and checked his phone. My cousin Rebecca Cole arrived on day 4 for the second week and immediately picked up on the strange atmosphere. She asked me privately if everything was okay between me and my mother. I told her I was not sure yet. On the 5th evening, Linda had 2 glasses of wine with dinner. She was usually careful with alcohol, but the combination of the long day on the water and the low constant pressure in the house seemed to loosen her tongue. We were all still at the table when she turned to my mother and said, half laughing, "Carol, did you ever decide how you were going to bring up the cottage thing at the dinner on Saturday? Because if you wait too long, Emily might actually think she planned the whole thing herself." The table went silent. My mother's face tightened. Linda realized what she had said and tried to backtrack. "I mean, the planning, everyone helped." No one believed the correction. My father, Robert, set his fork down carefully. Megan looked at me, then at our mother. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. Linda stared into her wine glass as if she could disappear into it. My mother stood up, smoothed her napkin, and said she was tired. She left the table. Linda followed her a minute later. The rest of us sat in the awkward quiet until Megan finally asked if anyone wanted dessert. No one did. That night I lay awake again. The old photograph on the nightstand beside me. I had not shown it to anyone yet. I had been waiting, the way I always waited, to see how far things would go before I decided what to do. The text thread between my mother and Linda had made the plan clear. On the final Saturday dinner, they intended to go around the table and correct the record about my contributions to the family. They had collected enough small distortions and outright lies to make it sound reasonable to the relatives who would be there. Rebecca had already heard some of it. Aunt Helen had apparently heard more. I picked up the photograph and traced the faded ink on the back with my thumb. My father's handwriting was steady and kind. He had never been one for long speeches, but he had always noticed who actually did the work. The note was only 4 words and a name, but it was enough. The next morning I woke to the sound of low voices on the deck below my window. My mother and Linda were talking again. I could not make out every word, but I heard my name twice and the word Saturday once. I stayed in bed until they went inside. By day 7, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Everyone was polite. No one mentioned the almost slip at dinner. My mother was especially careful around me, as if she were waiting to see whether I would confront her. I did not. I made coffee. I went for walks along the water. I helped Megan with a puzzle she had bought for the kids who were not there. I kept the photograph in my pocket. On the morning of day 8, I found the second document. It was not dramatic. It was a folded piece of paper that had slipped behind the drawer in the small desk in my room. I was looking for a pen when my fingers brushed it.
I pulled it out and unfolded it. It was a copy of an email I had sent 3 years earlier to the entire family about my father's memorial arrangements. I had coordinated the location, the flowers, the program, and the small reception afterward. At the bottom of the email, my mother had replied to everyone with a short note. "Thank you, Emily, for handling the details so we could focus on saying goodbye." I had forgotten I still had the copy. My mother had written it herself. She had thanked me in front of everyone. Now she was planning to stand in front of the same people and claim I had done almost nothing. I sat on the edge of the bed with the email in one hand and the photograph in the other. For the first time in the 8 days we had been at the cottage, I felt something shift inside me that was not anger. It was colder and clearer than anger. It was the recognition that the woman who had raised me had spent months quietly rewriting the story of who I was to the people I loved. And she had almost succeeded. I folded both pieces of paper and put them in the back of my journal. Then I went downstairs to make breakfast for whoever wanted it. The house was already awake. My mother was at the kitchen table with her laptop open. She looked up when I came in. "Emily," she said, her voice perfectly pleasant. "We were just talking about the dinner on Saturday. Linda thinks we should do a little toast for everyone who helped make the trip possible. What do you think?" I looked at her for a long moment. The cottage felt smaller than it had the day we arrived. I think I said quietly that some things are better left unsaid until the right moment. My mother smiled the same small, cold smile she had used on the deck days earlier. "We will see," she said. Outside, the water kept moving against the pilings. The sailboat from the first day was back on the Sound, tacking slowly into the wind. I watched it through the window while the coffee brewed. In 3 more days, the dinner would happen. In 3 more days, the text thread my mother and Linda had built would either stay hidden or become the thing that finally broke the version of our family they had been trying to protect. I poured myself a cup and carried it out to the deck. The air was already warm. I sat in the same chair I had used every morning and waited to see what the next move would be. The morning after Linda's slip at dinner, the house settled into a different kind of quiet. My mother moved through the kitchen with careful politeness, asking if anyone wanted more coffee and whether the weather looked good for a walk on the beach. My sister Megan tried to fill the spaces with small talk about a show she had been watching. My brother-in-law, David, nodded at the right moments, but kept his eyes on his plate. My cousin Rebecca Cole watched all of us with the quiet attention of someone who had walked into the middle of a story and was still trying to find the first page. I stayed practical. I washed the dishes from breakfast, wiped the counters, and made a list of things we still needed from the market. My father, Robert Harper, sat on the deck with the newspaper, turning pages slowly. No one mentioned Saturday. No one asked what Linda had meant by her half-finished sentence. The plan my mother and Linda had built in their messages was still moving forward, just under the surface. Later that same morning, my phone rang while I was folding towels in the laundry room. It was my Aunt Helen Parker. She rarely called during vacations, so I answered. "Emily, I hope I am not interrupting anything," she said. Her voice carried the same careful tone my mother had been using. "I was just talking to your mother yesterday, and she mentioned you had been having a hard time lately. She said the trip planning had been stressful for you and that you felt like no one appreciated what you were doing." I set the towel down on the dryer. "Aunt Helen, I never told her that." There was a short pause. Well, she seemed to think it was important for the family to understand. She said some things had been said in the group chat that upset her. "I just wanted to check on you, sweetheart." I thanked her and ended the call as gently as I could. When I walked back into the main room, my mother was standing at the island with her laptop open. She looked up. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Aunt Helen called," I said. "She wanted to make sure I was okay." My mother closed the laptop. She is a thoughtful woman. She has always cared about this family staying honest with each other. I did not answer. I went upstairs and opened my journal. The folded email and the old photograph were still there. I did not take them out. I simply sat on the edge of the bed and let the cold, clear feeling in my chest settle into something I could carry without breaking. That afternoon, Linda Thompson asked if I wanted to walk down to the water with her. We had not spoken alone since her slip at the table. We walked along the narrow path between the cottages. She kept her hands in her pockets and her eyes on the ground. "I should not have said anything last night," she said after a while. "It was the wine. I get loose when I drink." "You said enough," I answered. "How long has the plan for Saturday been in the messages?" Linda stopped walking. She looked out at the water instead of at me. "Your mother started it a few weeks ago. She said you had been telling people outside the family that she never does anything and that you were the only one holding things together. She wanted to correct the record in front of everyone before it got worse." "I have never said that to anyone outside the family," I told her. "And even inside it, I have not said it the way she is describing." Linda was quiet for a moment. "She has screenshots. She showed them to me. I do not know where they came from, but they look real." I thought about the family group chat again. I had never written anything close to what my mother claimed. The only way screenshots could exist was if someone had created them or taken something I said in a completely different context and twisted it. The cold feeling in my chest sharpened into something closer to anger. But I kept my voice even. "Linda, if you know the messages between you and my mother are part of a plan to stand up at dinner and list things I supposedly did wrong, why are you still here?" She looked down at her shoes. "Because she asked me to come. And because I thought maybe it would help if someone else was in the room, who could keep it from getting too ugly." I nodded once. We walked the rest of the way back to the cottage without speaking again. When we reached the deck, my mother was waiting with a glass of iced tea in her hand. She smiled at both of us, as if nothing had happened. The next 2 days moved like the tide, steady and impossible to stop. My mother made small, precise comments at every meal. At lunch on day 10, she mentioned how nice it was that some people in the family knew how to step back and let others lead, instead of always needing to be the one in charge. She did not look at me when she said it, but everyone else did. At dinner that night, she asked my sister Megan if she remembered how hard it had been to organize last year's holiday gathering, and how grateful she was that some people had not tried to take over. Megan glanced at me and changed the subject. I kept doing the small, practical things that needed doing. I restocked the pantry. I made sure the grill had propane. I answered work emails on the deck so I would not have to sit inside and listen to the careful politeness that had replaced normal conversation. Every evening, I checked the old photograph and the email in my journal. I did not show them to anyone yet. I was still waiting to see exactly how far my mother intended to go before I decided what the right moment would be. On the morning of day 11, my cousin Rebecca Cole found me on the deck before anyone else was awake. She sat in the chair next to mine with a mug of coffee. "I talked to my mom last night," she said. "Aunt Helen. She told me what she said to you on the phone. She also told me some of the things your mother has been saying about you to the rest of the family." I did not know it had gone that far. I kept my eyes on the water. "It has been going on for weeks, apparently, maybe longer." Rebecca was quiet for a while. "Are you going to say something at the dinner on Saturday?" "I have not decided yet," I answered. "I am still trying to understand why she needs to do it this way instead of just talking to me." Rebecca nodded. She did not push. She finished her coffee and went inside to start breakfast. I stayed on the deck and watched the sailboat that had become familiar over the past week. It was tacking back and forth in the same pattern every morning. The repetition was almost comforting. That afternoon, my mother asked if I would help her set the table for the big dinner the next night. She said she wanted everything to look nice for when the rest of the relatives arrived. I agreed. We worked side by side in the dining room, laying out the good plates my sister had brought and the cloth napkins Linda had ironed earlier. My mother handed me the silverware without looking at me. "You know," she said, after a minute, her voice soft and almost kind, "I have always admired how practical you are, Emily. You get things done. But sometimes being practical makes people forget that other people have feelings too. You can come across as if you think you are the only one who ever contributes anything." I placed a fork carefully beside a plate. "Is that what you were planning to say tomorrow night?" My mother set down the napkins she was holding. She looked at me directly for the first time in days. "I am planning to make sure the people who love this family understand the truth. That is all." I did not argue. I finished setting my side of the table and went upstairs. In my room, I opened the journal again. The photograph and the email were still there, I took them out and laid them on the bed. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the Note app. I typed a short list of the actual things I had done for this trip and for the family events my mother had mentioned in her messages. I did not add any commentary. I just listed dates and actions. When I was finished, I saved it and put the phone away. Downstairs, I could hear my mother and Linda talking in low voices again. I did not go down to listen. I sat on the edge of the bed with the photograph in my hands and waited for the next move. The following morning, the day before the dinner, my mother announced at breakfast that she wanted everyone to gather in the living room after lunch for a short family meeting. She said it was nothing serious, just a chance to talk about how the rest of the week would go and to make sure everyone felt heard. My sister Megan looked at me across the table. My father, Robert Harper, folded his newspaper and said he would be there. Linda Thompson nodded without meeting my eyes. I finished my coffee and carried my plate to the sink. While I was rinsing it, my phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Rebecca Cole. She had stepped outside. "Rebecca, Helen just called me again. She said your mother asked her to come tomorrow night for the dinner, even though she was not originally planning to drive up. Helen thinks something big is going to happen. She wanted to know if I knew what it was." I typed back quickly. "Me. I know what it is. Do not worry. I will handle it." I put the phone in my pocket and turned off the water. Through the window, I could see my mother on the deck with Linda. They were standing close together, heads bent toward each other. My mother was holding her phone. I could not see the screen, but I knew what was probably on it. The cold, clear feeling in my chest had been there for 11 days now. It no longer surprised me when it appeared. I dried my hands on a towel and walked out onto the deck. My mother looked up when she heard the door. "Emily," she said, her voice perfectly pleasant again. "We were just going over the seating for tomorrow. I put you next to your father. I thought that would be nice." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I looked at Linda, who was studying the wooden boards under her feet. "Mom," I said, "I think we should talk before the dinner tomorrow. Just the two of us." My mother smiled, the small, cold smile I had seen too many times in the past week and a half. "Of course, sweetheart. We can talk whenever you want. But I think it would be better if we all talked together tomorrow night. That way, everyone hears the same thing at the same time." She turned and went back inside. Linda followed her without looking at me. I stayed on the deck and watched the sailboat make its slow turn across the water. In less than 24 hours, the dinner would happen. In less than 24 hours, the text thread my mother and Linda had built would either stay hidden in their phones or become the thing that finally made the rest of the family see what had been happening for weeks. I went upstairs and opened my journal one more time. The photograph and the email were still on the bed where I had left them. I folded them carefully and put them in the inside pocket of the light jacket I planned to wear to dinner. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and waited for the day to finish. The next evening, the rest of the family began arriving while the light was still soft over the water. My Aunt Helen Parker came first, carrying a covered dish and wearing the same careful expression she had used on the phone. My cousin Rebecca Cole's husband, James Cole, arrived with her, both of them quiet as they stepped into the living room. My mother, Carol Harper, greeted each of them with warm hugs and small comments about how nice it was to have everyone together for the final dinner of the trip. Linda Thompson moved through the kitchen with plates and glasses, her shoulders tight. My father, Robert Harper, sat in his usual chair by the window and said very little. I wore the light jacket with the photograph and the email folded in the inside pocket. I had not decided exactly when I would take them out. I only knew I would not let the evening end the way my mother had scripted it in the messages she and Linda had exchanged. We sat down at the long table just after 7. The plates my sister Megan Ellis had brought caught the light from the overhead fixture. My mother had placed name cards, something she almost never did. I was between my father and my cousin Rebecca. Linda Thompson sat across from me. My mother took the seat at the head of the table. She waited until everyone had served themselves before she stood with her glass. The room quieted. I wanted to take a moment before we finished this trip. My mother said, her voice warm and steady, to talk about what it really means to show up for family. Some of us have been carrying more than our share for a long time. Some of us have let others believe they were the only ones doing the work. She looked around the table, pausing just long enough for people to feel the shift. My Aunt Helen Parker set her fork down. James Cole glanced at his wife. My sister Megan kept her eyes on her plate. My mother continued. This cottage, for example. I know some people have been telling stories about who found it and who handled the details. The truth is that I spent weeks looking at listings and making calls, while others were busy with their own lives. I did not mind doing it, but I do mind when the credit goes somewhere it does not belong. She turned her gaze to me then. The smile on her face did not change. Emily, I know you like to be helpful. But sometimes being helpful can turn into taking over. And sometimes the stories we tell ourselves about how much we have done are not the same as what actually happened. The table was completely still. My father, Robert Harper, looked at me and then at my mother. Linda Thompson stared at her water glass. My cousin Rebecca Cole's hand tightened around her napkin. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and took out the folded photograph and the printed email. I laid them on the table in front of me without unfolding them yet. Mom, I said, keeping my voice even. Before you finish, I want to show everyone something. I opened the photograph first. The image was old, from the weekend of my father's memorial 3 years earlier. On the back, in his steady handwriting, were the words I had read so many times. Emily did the hard part again. Thank you, kid. I passed it to my sister Megan. She read it and passed it to my father. He read it without speaking, then handed it to my Aunt Helen Parker. My mother's smile had gone thin. That was a long time ago, Emily. Things change. I unfolded the email next. It was the one I had sent to the whole family about the memorial arrangements. At the bottom was my mother's own reply, the one she had written in front of everyone. Thank you, Emily, for handling the details so we could focus on saying goodbye. I passed that around as well. No one spoke for a moment. The only sound was the faint clink of ice melting in someone's glass. My mother set her own glass down carefully. I do not remember writing that. You did, I said. It is still in the family email archive. I printed it yesterday. My Aunt Helen Parker looked at my mother. Carol, why would you tell us she had been making up stories about the cottage when she clearly did the work on this too? My mother's face had gone pale under the dining room light. She opened her mouth and closed it again. Linda Thompson finally spoke, her voice low. I saw the messages too, she said. Between Carol and me. We were planning to talk about this tonight. I should not have gone along with it. The room stayed quiet while people passed the photograph and the email from hand to hand. My cousin James Cole read both and set them down in front of my mother without a word. My sister Megan reached across the table and touched my arm once, lightly. My mother stood up. She did not raise her voice. She simply said she was tired and went upstairs. Linda Thompson followed her a minute later. The rest of us stayed at the table. My father, Robert Harper, picked up the photograph again and looked at the handwriting for a long time. After dinner, I went out onto the deck alone. The sailboat was gone from the water. The air had cooled. I stood there until my sister Megan came out and stood beside me. I did not know it had gotten this bad, she said. Neither did I until I saw the messages, I answered. She was quiet for a while. What are you going to do now? I looked out at the dark line where the water met the sky. I am going to finish the week because I said I would. Then I am going home. And after that, I am going to stop being the person who makes everything easy for everyone else while they rewrite what I did. Megan nodded. She did not argue. She went back inside after a few minutes. I stayed on the deck until the lights in the house went out, one by one. The next morning, I packed my bag before anyone else was up. I left a note on the kitchen counter for my father, telling him I loved him and that I would call when I got home. I did not leave a note for my mother. I drove away while the sun was still low over the sound. In the weeks that followed, the family group chat grew quiet. My mother sent one message, asking if I was all right. I answered that I was fine and that I needed some time. She did not reply again. My Aunt Helen Parker called once to say she was sorry for believing the version she had been told. My cousin Rebecca Cole texted to check in every few days. My sister Megan came to visit me in the city one weekend, and we talked for hours without mentioning the cottage or the dinner. The everyday connection I had once had with my mother did not return. Holidays became smaller. Phone calls became shorter. She never asked again about the photograph or the email. I never offered to show them to her a second time. What I learned in those weeks after I drove away from the cottage is that my value was never in how much I could organize or how quietly I could carry things for other people. My value was in the fact that I existed at all, separate from what I could provide. Protecting that truth turned out to be more important than keeping the peace at any table. I still have the photograph and the email in a drawer in my apartment. Sometimes I take them out when I need to remember that the record I kept for myself was enough. I do not need anyone else to agree anymore. Thank you for listening to my story. If this happened to you, drop peace in the comments if you chose yourself.